Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's the first meeting in the new municipal year of this committee, so welcome. The first item is election of chair. Is there a nomination, please? Yes, go ahead. Michael. Mike?
It's the first meeting, isn't it? I'd like to nominate Catherine Glover to be chair of the committee.
Is there a seconder for that nomination?
Yes, happy to second, Catherine.
Thank you. Are there any other nominations? Okay. Congratulations, Catherine. You're in the chair.
Yeah, item number 2 is the appointment of a vice chair. So are there any nominations? Yes.
I'd like to nominate Catherine Harding, please.
Okay,
Thank you.
Catherine is there. Have we got a seconder?
Yep, happy to second, Catherine.
Lou, yeah. Any other nominations? Nope. Okay. Oh,
Chair,
Peter.
sorry, this is not a nomination. It's an apology for not being there in person. The meeting request looked like it was online Teams meeting, but there was a small sentence that said to be there in person. It didn't actually say which meeting room either. So my apologies. I've actually been in the council all day at the planning appeal, so I could have just stayed over and met you there. But apologies for not being there in person.
okay. Right. Are there any other apologies?
Only also apologies for not being in person, but that's due to the fact that I've got a 1-month-old. So thank you very much for the flexibility in being able to.
So Henry is also here.
Yes, I won't show you because he's currently breastfeeding, but it definitely makes my life a bit easier tonight.
So also apologies from Martin Alder and Caroline Smith, and Beth Rowland and Lou Timlin are here as substitutes.
Okay. Okay, we need to confirm the minutes of the meeting of the 29th of February. And I think the only common denominator there was me and Neil. And I have read through them, and as far as I can see, there's nothing wrong with them. Right. So I'll vote to accept the minutes, yes. Okay, so declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest? Adrian.
I think I should probably declare that I also sit on the Barkham Solar Farm project board, and therefore potentially am scrutinising myself when we come to talk about that.
Okay, are there any public questions, Neil?
There were no public questions and no member questions, Chair.
Excellent. Okay, so item number 8 is the Climate Emergency Action Plan 5th report to scrutinise the 5th annual update of the Climate Emergency Action Plan. Now, we did talk to Jordan. I didn't talk to Jordan, but talked to the officers about what we would do in this meeting, because we're all new. I mean, even I had only been on it for a year, and I'd only just pretty much fathomed out what it was all about. So we agreed to have an introduction by Jordan and then an introduction by Mary, and establish the direction that we want the committee to go in. So over to you, Jordan.
Thank you very much, Chair. So this report covers the progress that the Council has made towards reaching our goal of a carbon neutral Wokingham by 2030, in particular covering the 2023-2024 period, outlines the actions that we have taken as a Council, their associated carbon savings and the future avenues that we plan to take these continued successes. The report also notes the areas where we still have difficulties, in particular the struggles that we're having with funding, both with the ongoing financial constraints that we and almost all local authorities currently find ourselves under, and the wider issue of restricted external government funding and grants. The key issue outline that I feel is covered in this report is that the climate emergency team and their partners across the council have made some absolutely fantastic successes, and that the legacy of the previous executive member, Sarah Kerr, is something that all members and residents alike can be proud of, especially compared to the baseline of no action had we continued on without our climate emergency action plan. We have made some outstanding progress towards reaching our goal. Nevertheless, under our existing plan, we are still estimated to fall short of our 2030 carbon neutral target. I see this as a fantastic opportunity to be even more ambitious and innovative in our approach, and I look forward to taking the CAP forward along with this incredible team. And I'm now going to pass to Mary to give a presentation, particularly for some of the newer members to this group, to look over some of the history of the climate emergency action plan and how far we have come over the last 5 years.
Thanks, Jordan.
Peter, did you want to say something?
Unmute myself, sorry about that. Would it be possible just to ask Jordan some questions, because obviously he's written the introduction, so I have some questions on the introduction within the report.
Yes, sure.
Okay, thank you. Jordan, on the bottom of the first column of text, it talks about climate emergency intertwined with the cost of living and fuel poverty crisis, which I kind of understand. But then you go to talk about failing to act on climate change will result in higher energy prices. And I wasn't sure what the connection between energy prices and climate change would be. So would you be able to provide some clarity on that?
So this is something I might go to Mari for.
Yeah, I think this might be referencing the benefits of solar panels. So where we see there's a benefit of taking action that has carbon reduction benefits, there's also that kind of financial benefit. So with residents getting solar panels, then there's evidence that it can lead to cheaper energy costs further down the line once they after they've installed them.
Excellent. Could perhaps Jordan swap that round and have a bit more positive to say, if we act on climate change, it will result in lower energy prices. That's a more positive kind of statement to say. If people actually act and install solar panels or do various measures like insulate the houses, it'll reduce their cost of energy rather than. I think it's a much more positive thing to say.
Yeah, I think it's a fair comment. I think you definitely want to kind of celebrate the positives, take that spin. I think that's a good approach to take.
And I've got one other question on the opposite column towards the end. You talk about, and you mentioned this in your introduction, we need more resources and support from central government to deliver the bold action plan. I had a look through the report and I couldn't see, what's the ask here. So what do we need from central government in terms of action, funding? Because at the moment there's no detail around here, so we're just sort of saying we need more money and more action. But there's nothing there concrete to say what funding we're looking for, over what period of time, and in order to achieve certain actions. So is there something that we can add to this report to say what we need from central government?
Yeah, so I think the reference there is primarily around climate action's not currently a statutory function. It's not a statutory for local governments to act on it, which I think Wokingham see and many other authorities, from like speaking to officers in other councils, that actually, because it's not that statutory function, what we often come up against in there's often investment required to move forward some of the actions within the climate action plan, but the upfront funding isn't there in some of the actions, because there's different priorities within the council, and often that's linked to the statutory functions. So there is actually, I do reference it a bit in the presentation as well. So I don't know whether it's worth whether that answers your question, or whether it's worth, if I go through the presentation, if there's questions following that, it might help kind of give a bit more clarity.
It may do, but I think it'd be worthwhile having it in the report, because if we're calling out to central government, we need things, money, activity, powers. These ought to be clearly stated. Otherwise, we don't really know what we're asking for, and we can't measure against those.
Yeah, and I think that's something we try to do within, where the actions are within the climate emergency action plan. We try and get the costings linked to each action, but it's not always easy to do. We kind of try and do our best. I think we do. There are kind of grants available through central government that we can bid for, but often the process for bidding for them is very lengthy, and we're not always successful. So I think that's a challenge as well that we face within the team, trying to get the funding and having the resource to put the time in to make it a bid that kind of is successful.
So I guess one of the bullet points and requests for central government is to streamline the bidding process and make it easier for us to apply for funds. Thank you.
Jordan, do you want to say something?
Yes, I think it'd be a great idea to push on with the presentation, because it covers a lot of these areas, some in an overview, but I think it'd be fantastic to help members here formulate some of their questions on some of the specifics that are raised in the presentation.
Okay.
Right, I will now share my screen. Takes a while. Can you see that? Everyone see that?
Yeah.
Yeah, great. So yeah, as Jordan mentioned, I put this presentation together just to provide some information on the background of the CAP, why we have it, what's in it, and then look a bit to the future, referencing some of the climate commitments that were referenced in the Labour's manifesto, and also a recent report that's come out from the Climate Change Committee. So again, as Jordan said, we recognise new group, new chair, new exec members. So what we want to do is just kind of bring everyone up to speed to what's happening locally, but also at that national level, what's happened in the past and what's might happen in the future. So just to provide a bit of an overview of some key dates where there's been some significant activity that's happened. So in 2008, the Climate Change Act in the UK was introduced, UK being the first country to establish a long-term legally binding framework to cut carbon emissions. Initially, this target was to cut emissions by 80%. This was increased in 2019 to the target to be net zero by 2050. In 2019, also at the local level, more than half of UK local authorities declared a climate emergency, including Wokingham, and Wokingham committed to do as much as possible to achieve carbon neutrality by 2030. In 2020, the Wokingham's first climate emergency action plan was published, and this came about from identifying opportunities and setting targets with council teams to make carbon savings. In 2021, the government net zero strategy was published, and that referenced the important role that local government has to play in meeting net zero ambitions. as it's best placed to integrate activity on the ground and inspire action with businesses, communities and residents. In 2022, Wokingham held a deliberative process, Let's Talk Climate, and that was with individuals from different community groups, and that fed into the council's response to climate change. And then here we are at 2024, we've got the Climate Emergency Action Plan with the 5th progress report to be published. So just to give a bit of an update, an overview on the Climate Emergency Action Plan. So this is updated and published annually. So it really is to outline to stakeholders the progress that's being made on the actions over the past year. We collect updates and agree updates with relevant officers across the council, because it's a real a council-wide strategy. It's lots of teams are involved in kind of driving forward the actions that sit within it. So we have regular internal governance meetings, and that tracks progress throughout the year. So it's not just at the end of the year we get all the updates. We have those internal meetings throughout, and we also not only to get an update on the actions, but also to understand any challenges and have a kind of forum so we can discuss any barriers that exist and think of as well new opportunities that we can implement around carbon reduction. As well as progress updates, the CAP also includes the latest available detail on current borough and council emissions, trajectories, government strategies and climate-based background information. And then just looking at the 5th progress report, so where we're at today, so we have a breakdown. So all the actions within the report are given a RAG status. For this year, we've got over 50% at green, 35% at amber and 8% at red. We've added a new action this year linked to a new solar installation, and there's an estimated carbon saving of 248 tonnes per year. We've also, so this year what we've looked at, last year there was a priority area on schools. This year what we've done is incorporate the school actions across the CAP. So we've got an engagement area, we've got a retrofitting priority area, we've got a carbon sequestration area. The school actions have been moved across to the relevant area, and the thinking behind that was because we have, you know, we engage with different groups, we engage with residents, we engage with businesses, we engage with schools, and it felt like to bring a bit of consistency to the plan, it made sense to remove that separate school priority area like we've done with residents and businesses, instead have it throughout the CAP. We also merged some of the school actions, and we've aligned some of them to the Department for Education Sustainability Strategy. So this is something we're supporting in partnership with University of Reading. So we really wanted to have that reflected in the CAP for this year. There's also been some updates to the procurement priority area. So these have been reviewed and updated to reflect current approaches and ensure deliverables can be measured against. Changes to the procurement sections were discussed at this overview and scrutiny back in February. So just to then touch upon some of our successes, so there's some of them are listed in the report, so you would have seen them, but just to kind of re-emphasize some of the good news stories that have come out this year. So we do have the emissions shortfall for 2030 is looking smaller this year than it did last year. So we're at a shortfall of 167 kilotons, whereas this time last year it was 232. We have a strategic partnership with University of Reading, as I mentioned, and there's a climate and sustainability work stream in that partnership. And we're looking at opportunities where we can work together to deliver on carbon savings and increase awareness in the community. One initiative that's in flight is the Climate Ambassador Scheme, which is all about recruiting local volunteers to support schools creating their own climate action plan. And Resh, our engagement officer, is working really closely with the regional lead for the Climate Ambassador Scheme at Reading, and Wokingham is one of the pilot schools for the initiative in this region. We've also got a net zero work stream as part of the Prosperity Board. So again, there's real opportunity to work with our neighbouring authorities to see what areas we can work together and kind of make more progress to hit our carbon neutral targets. Obviously, then we've got the connection date confirmed for Barkham Solar Farm. So that you all be aware of that. So that's confirmed for 2026. That's projected to make 68 million in profit over 25 years and a carbon saving of over 6,000 tonnes of carbon per year. Wokingham also had the highest uptake of solar panels in the Berkshire-wide Solar Together scheme last year, and the scheme's currently open for registrations, and we are currently, again, the highest. We've got the highest number of registrations across the 6 authorities that are taking part in the scheme. Then we've got the implementation of the AWC, which will be coming next month, and that will save over 1 million, but also it will save there'll be over 2,000 tonnes of carbon savings associated with that change that's coming in. The local plan update, so that's progress, and there's key sustainability policies that are included in that. The climate emergency questionnaire is now included in tender documentation process, and this will provide us with insight and help shape future guidance for our suppliers. Then from an engagement perspective, we've launched the Climate Emergency Hub on the council website, and we're working with our comms team at the moment to capture data on the usage of these pages, and we'll look to promote more widely now we're out of PERDA. And we also have drafted a simplified CAPS, which we're calling CAP in a snapshot. I'm aware this was included in the documentation that was sent round, but I think there was some issues with the formatting in the process of getting it on Modern Gov. So if you kind of looked at it and thought this looks a bit odd, it's apologies for that. That was linked to some formatting issues. I think it happens when it goes from Word to PDF, but hopefully it gives you the flavour of what we want to do with that. So it's looking at, the current CAP's over 100 pages, but we really want to engage as many members, as many staff, as many residents as possible with what we're doing in the climate emergency space. So we thought, having a smaller, more streamlined report that we can publish alongside the more detailed CAP report will hopefully help engage more people with what we're doing. So that's me finished on that slide. Peter, I can see you've got your hand up.
Yeah, just got a question on the waste and recycling. So you've got a figure of 2,415 tonnes per year. Is there a breakdown on that in terms of, more recycling, more food waste collected, less vehicle journeys? So hopefully there's a breakdown so we can monitor that over the years as it's implemented. The other question I've got is, obviously we're going out to tender for the renewal of the waste collection. So how do we ensure that the benefits, if they come from the changes, are improved somewhat more with the new contract, perhaps for zero emission vehicles, etc. So slightly rambling question, but there's 2 parts. Do we have the breakdown of the 2,415? And also, how do we, for the new contract, make sure we get even better in terms of that saving?
Yeah, no, great questions. I think on the second question, we are talking to our colleagues in waste and procurement on that waste contract. So we recognise that we want to feed in and where we can look for those opportunities to kind of build on that carbon saving that we're seeing through the AWC. On your first question, I'm going to bring in my colleague Andrew Collins, who is probably best placed to answer.
Yeah, thanks. So in terms of the carbon saving, I think it's in line with the work that we've done with the consultant on that, and I think the breakdown is in one of the I don't know if it's the over in Scrutiny meeting they went to, but the waste went to a separate committee, and the breakdowns in those reports. So ours is just a summary of that. So yeah, those are available.
Thank you.
Okay, so then just moving on to challenges. So as I mentioned, we do have some actions that are red and amber, and often the reason behind this is that it's difficult to progress some of the actions, and this is linked to often the challenges that we've got from national level policies. So like I mentioned, climate action is not a statutory duty for councils. And then we've also got the funding challenges across the council and externally, which we're all very aware of. So costs, initial cost, but also resource. So having staff to have the time to kind of commit is difficult with all the other priorities. So that I kind of touched upon that, and that graph there just shows that that's where, even with the CAP and all the actions in there, you can see that yellow line will not get us to that 2030 ambition. But I think to unblock that, we need kind of stronger legislation or and more funding. I can see a hand up.
Thanks, Mary. Just wanted to ask, so when the line which says with CAP, is that assuming all of the actions are actually completed, or is that only the kind of green ones or the ones that have been in line? Okay, so we've got, I guess, a gap of some degree of funding and resource need to deliver the CAP, and then another kind of gap to get to the net zero in 2030.
Yeah, correct.
Thanks.
Adrian.
Yeah, I've got an awful lot of questions, but I was planning not to interrupt all the way through this, and I understand why people are. But could we get to the end of the presentation?
I think that's a good idea. Let's get to the end of
come back to the document.
End of Mary's presentation before any more questions. Thank you.
Okay. So then just looking forward with the change in national government, so there may be changes at the national level that could support in some of the work we're doing at a local level with increased funding and stronger policies in place. So this includes, we've got the Energy Independence Act. So all this is stuff that was mentioned in the Labour's manifesto, as I mentioned. So the Energy Independence Act, this is a legal framework for energy and climate related policies, and the goal is to reach 100% clean UK electricity by 2030. There's the National Wealth Fund, which has been mentioned, and that's around investing and growing new jobs in green industries and encouraging the private sector to invest. There's Great British Energy, so it's been referenced that we working with local authorities and energy companies to establish thousands of clean energy projects. The Warm Homes Plan, so there's 6.6 billion grants and low interest loans over Parliament to upgrade 5 million homes in partnership with local government through insulation, solar panels, batteries and low carbon heating. There's also things mentioned in some of the other missions, so the updating national policy planning policy frameworks, so ensuring local authorities have up-to-date local plans and strengthening the presumption towards sustainable development. Building higher quality homes, sustainable homes. On electric vehicles, there's commitments around phasing out the date for new internal combustion engines, so phasing it out, taking it back to 2030, accelerating the rollout of charge points and standardising battery conditions on second-hand electric vehicles. There's also mention of new powers for local leaders to franchise local bus services, giving local communities more control over routes and schedules. So it's very early days of the new government, and the coming weeks and months we'll get more clarity on what will be delivered and when. But I think it's worth kind of having a bit of an understanding of, what has been said to date. And then finally, I thought it'd be worth sharing the Climate Change Committee report that came out last week, because it's so hot off the press. So the Climate Change Committee is an independent statutory body. It was established under the Climate Change Act in 2008, and their purpose is to advise the UK and devolved governments on emission targets and to report to Parliament on progress made in reducing greenhouse gas emissions and preparing for and adapting to the impacts of climate change. So last week, the Climate Change Committee, for the first time since setting itself carbon reduction targets, stated the UK is not on track to meet its goal. On the positive, the country's emissions are now less than half the levels they were in 1990, and this is mostly due to the phase out of coal and increase in renewables. But to continue to decarbonise the UK, ambitious action is needed, is what the CCC are saying, and it's not just in the energy sector, but across transport, across buildings, industry, carbon removal and agriculture. So the committee will publish more advice and updated path to net zero early in 2025. And that's that. So I'll stop sharing. Okay.
Thank you very much, Mary. Okay. I know we've got some questions from Adrian.
Okay. Murray, thank you very much for the report. I've just joined the committee this year, but I have been looking and scrutinising the CAP as a part-time hobby for many years, back since helping Sarah Kerr in opposition, probably 4 or 5 years ago now, when it was just a draft. So delighted to see the maturity it's reached now, and that we've got a good team working on it. I've got quite a few questions, but I'll try and focus on the most significant ones. It feels to me, and it has done for some time, that the plan overall is a collection of what we think we can do to influence and to achieve net zero in the borough, as opposed to actually a plan to do it. And I understand why that's the case, because an awful lot of even what we consider to be in scope for Wokingham is actually out with our control. We can't force people to stop driving their cars. We can't force them to insulate their homes and so on. So is it a fair characterisation that the plan is essentially actions which we think will make the biggest difference, as opposed to a plan by which we actually expect to get to net zero?
Murray?
Yeah, I think what's worth mentioning is we see the plan, and I think it's always been an iterative document. So it is very ambitious. There's a lot of things within that plan, but it's dynamic. So if we see there's actions in there that actually we won't be able to take forward, we'll kind of review that and see actually is there other things that we can put in. So I think, yeah, we've got it's definitely, there's a lot in there, and I think it's ambitious, but I think key is that we constantly look at it and kind of adapt it. Rhiannon, do you want to come in as well?
Hi, I'm Rhiannon Hayes, the Assistant Director for Economy and Housing, and also work on the CAP. And I hear what Adrian's saying. It's if we were to write a plan that was actually going to achieve net zero by 2030, we might be putting something in such as cycle lanes right across the borough. And that's probably so far away from what we can actually achieve. But what we've done is we've worked on what is possible, as you've said, and perhaps stretched ourselves a little further. And that is really down to the fact that the sphere of control we have is direct control, I should say, is on our own assets and our own staff, possibly. And then what at best we have outside that is influence and persuasion. So it's been a very difficult balance for us to achieve, but I totally hear what you're saying in terms of it's not a plan that directly is populated by actions that we can directly take to achieve net zero carbon.
Yeah, thank you. And that's not meant as a criticism in any way.
Yeah.
Just set the context for a couple of other questions. The figure 2 in the CAP update shows a straight line rate of savings through to 2030. Obviously, in reality, the savings won't be accrued in a straight line. Do we have a feel for what the real profile looks like based on the actions in the plan at the moment? Is it front-loaded, back-loaded, or have we not been able to work that out?
Good.
Yeah, I would say that they are probably backloaded, and that again, I mean, some of the if we were to look at the whole thing, we've done some of the low-hanging fruit right at the beginning. I would say probably now it's backloaded, and again, that's down to, I suppose, some of the challenge that we face in delivering some of the interventions and measures that we'd like to take. They often require a level of finance, to be honest, and that at the moment with the council's finances where they are, as are all councils, is part of the challenge, I would say.
Thank you. So third of 4 awkward questions. And Peter touched on this earlier on. The plan talks about more government support to deliver the actions. And that's, I think, on top of government support to deliver the gap as well, beyond our plan. to what extent do we understand, or do we have a view on what this additional support is? Can we quantify it, define it, and do we have an understanding of the likelihood of it actually happening?
Well, that's a really interesting question, and we are at the moment drawing together some suggestions to government on what they might do to help local authorities work better towards reaching our goals on what can be done. It's not finished yet, so we're in the process of doing it. So obviously stronger regulation would give us some more teeth in which we might be able to perhaps enforce, ask developers to be more to build properties that are more energy efficient or generate their own energy. So we might be, there's lots of examples of where stronger enforcement would help. Obviously, better investment would help us invest in things like mentioned cycle lanes, but electric charging points. So there's quite a few things, but we could bring back some of our recommendations to this group next time after we've completed that piece of work. But I would invite colleagues that are here, if they've got any thoughts, to answer that question as well. Perhaps we can bring those back as well, actually, Adrian, I think.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that would be very helpful, because we've made a good effort to define what we need to put into this, and then accepted that there's a lot of government support required as well, but we don't seem to define at the moment what that is. I suspect in many areas it significantly outweighs in financial and possibly even in work terms what we're planning to do. And if we're assuming assumptions based on our part of it, but can't really pin down the government contribution, then that obviously creates quite a lot of risk. My final question, you'll be pleased to hear. We seem to be measuring our actual performance in kilotons of CO2 equivalent by looking in the rearview mirror at the government 3-year-old emissions numbers. And projecting from the most recent data forward to 2030. We have a number of actions which assume they'll achieve a certain amount of saving, and I'm sure they're right. But within each of those actions, there appear to be measurable things which we could be measuring and reporting on to say whether or not we're on track. And for example, I mean, the big savings come down really to very few things. It's road transport and domestic gas, by the looks of it. So if we pick domestic gas, for which insulation I think is probably the key measure, I can't see anything in the report which says how many houses we have actually had insulated, how many we expect to have insulated by 2030, and therefore, are we on track in terms of achievement, and what does the profile of achievement expect to look like? And if we could do that for maybe the top 5 actions, so drill down into what are the internal metrics. So we've got a forward-looking view of, or a real-time view of progress, as opposed to just a top-level historical view of progress. I think that might give us a little bit more confidence again.
Okay, we'll take that away, actually. Thank you. We'll look and see if we could perhaps work through some examples of that. And I mean, I'm not sure how we would get the data on private sector properties, but we'll go and we'll do some research and see what we can come back with as a measure of that. I think that's a good idea.
Thank you.
On that subject, it might be useful to do a survey of how many properties are actually sort of pre-cavity wall insulation, because that might suggest where the problem is.
Yeah, having used the excellent home decarbonisation tool myself, I suspect that data exists within it, because it knew straight away that my house was cavity built and not insulated.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and
Chair,
it is some.
Sorry, Chair, for those buildings who have an EPC certificate, I believe there is a publicly available database that you can find out what they are. So we should be able to, for the borough, find out the different ratings of those buildings that have been rated.
Yeah, there is, and it's something we the team are kind of looking at capture. We're really keen to kind of look at the data that exists and understand what the picture is, and that can help drive actions and help kind of track that progress. So with EPCs, that's something we're looking at to see in both kind of private and commercial, what across the borough, what is the EPC picture, and then from that kind of set more like targets.
And we should be able to do it on social housing as well. Perhaps we have more information on that, so we could separate the two out and have a look. Yeah.
And we've got it for our registered providers as well, so that's broken down as well. You can see data for them.
Moses.
Okay. There's this reference to savings in CO2 emissions from alternative waste collection. What is the degree of confidence in this estimate?
And
sorry, can you repeat that for overall or any particular actions?
And you've estimated about 2,400 tons or kilotons of CO2 equivalent from going to alternative weekly collection. I'm just asking what's the degree of confidence in that estimate? Pessimistic, optimistic?
Yeah, it's optimistic. Like I said, that's in conjunction with a specialist consultant. So we've done it with them. So like I said, there's a detailed. My voice is going. Detailed breakdown there, and that's based on government emission factors, and like those are things like RAP use as well. Again, it's a specialist waste company, so very confident with those kind of figures. Obviously, if we achieve the metrics within it.
Yeah, but I asked the question because some of those factors are a bit speculative. So it would be useful to know what the 70% degree of accuracy. Someone will come to measure at the end of, say, a year, we know whether we've achieved it or not.
Yeah, they have got aspects with it, things within it to measure where we are, like the progress of it. Are we moving towards what we want from those changes?
I think if we don't have it at this meeting, we can go away, Moses, and come back with those levels of certainty for you if they're available.
I don't think we'll be able to get an exact number in terms of percentage of confidence, but yeah, we can.
Yeah, because they're normally based on factors. So that's one. Yeah, okay. The other question I wanted to ask, I don't know whether I'm coming from private sector financing or public financing. You said you estimate 68 million profit from Backham solar farm. I would have thought we should be talking about internal rate of returns over 25 years.
Over 25 years it was, yeah.
So what's the internal rate of returns in percentage? Because you've got to account for time value of money and then present value. So profit in terms of project financing is for me, it's not the best measure.
Like, do you mean like ROI and stuff?
Yeah, what I was going to say, what is the internal rate of returns over 25 years? Because whatever revenues we get, we are going to account for the fact that it's been discounted, because 1 million this year is not 1 million next year.
Yeah, I think the actual energy team, and again, I think there are reports available about like the more detailed finance section. There isn't anyone here who's specialist on that part, but those are already available, I think. So
we can come back with that question. We can come back with a written answer after this meeting from our colleagues that work in that specialist field.
Neil has something to say.
Just on that point, we had a report to the previous committee. It's referenced in the minutes, so we could circulate that report, which gives quite a lot of financial data. And then obviously, if you have questions, we can take them and get answers for you following that.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, Alex.
Hi, I've got quite a few questions. I think probably a lot of them will be quite simple answers because it would just be a lack of my understanding. It mentioned at the start of the report that future adverse changes in the energy market would be investigated. So do we know what the results of that investigation were? In terms of Where does it mention it? I think it's on page 9. Yeah, in terms of it, so the Barkham Solar Farm being a 25-year plan, it said that consideration against future adverse changes in the energy market would be investigated. So has this been done? And if so, what were the results of that investigation?
So unfortunately, the energy team who would be best placed to, I think, answer that question, they're not on the call, but we can take that away with some of the other related Barkham questions and solar farm questions and come back to you on that one.
Sorry, I didn't press the button properly. Apologies. The carbon sequestration, I don't know, again, I've only been a councillor for 2 months and I was reading this report, I was trying my best. It seemed quite low. And one of the things I read about recently was the how useful wetlands can be, and sort of peat bogs, I think they refer to them as. So there's lots of them in Scotland. I think they take up, I was reading, they take up 3% of the Earth's land mass, and they offset more carbon than all of the trees on the planet. So they're like 10 or 15 times better at offsetting carbon than planting trees. So there's a lot of stuff later on in the report about flood management. I just wondered if there were any wetlands that currently exist in the borough and whether or not anyone has investigated rehydrating them. I don't know that that's the official terminology, but if anybody's looked into bogs and wetlands as a means of offsetting our carbon yet.
Yeah.
I know that we do have wetland areas, particularly around by California Country Park. But I think what we'd need to do is probably speak to our trees and our biodiversity team and ask them. Some of them are areas of specific scientific interest, and so they're protected. But that is a really good point, that they do act as a carbon sink and they're quite powerful in doing so. But I'm not sure that we've got anyone in the call again from the biodiversity team. Have we, Mary? Or
no, we don't.
Got an answer?
Just looking at this CAP, there is an action on 4.24, which is it mentions about creation of wetland habitats. It's the Developer Natural Flood Management Partnership Scheme. So it is currently at red, that one. And the reason for that is because a lot of the team in that area is focused on the reactive work. But there's definitely that kind of, they recognise, the benefits of wetland habitats, and that's why it's in the CAP. So as we, we've got here, there is a initial focus looking at Hurst and looking at the feasibility around that. So hopefully that will progress and we can provide updates on that, as kind of more that moves forwards. And then I guess it's kind of, if that works, it's then scaling it, isn't it, to get the bigger benefits.
Just from my day job, which is partly looking at natural climate solution carbon offset projects, I'm pretty sure we don't have any peatland or large areas, certainly within the borough. But of course, wetlands, we do have a significant sort of flood area. So great that it's in the action plan.
Yeah, I would say that in terms of as well cost benefit, money in versus CO2 removed, the fact that it's in red is a bit disappointing, I guess, because it should be an area where we can, in theory, spend not as much money and get a lot out of it. The next question, there was a home working study done it's on page 39. Let me scroll down, hold on, into essentially, I assume, about people's working habits, the fact that most jobs now are listed as hybrid, and trains are basically transporting air around the country on Mondays and Fridays. I wondered if there was any interesting findings from that, and because I think, post-pandemic, the fact that people's working habits are changing, is that helping us out? Is that hindering us? Because obviously you've got to heat your homes if you're working in there during the winter, but equally you're not driving to work. So I wondered if there were any interesting findings from that.
Yeah, I think that was a broader study, but the specific findings on home working, I think where we're at with home working is that kind of, so we haven't actively promoted it because we recognise there's lots of other factors to consider. So things like, people's well-being and getting out and about and having conversations with people in the office. So I've spoken with our economic development head of economic development around this action and thinking, actually, what do we do around it? And so we haven't progressed it because it's not as there's lots of stuff to think about with home working. I think within that climate change committee report, linking back to the transport side of things, and at that national level, I think there was this finding that actually the travel and the traffic on the roads, it hasn't gone back to pre-pandemic levels. So I think we know that the traffic has reduced from home workings, but it's not we're not actively promoting it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And then hold on, I'm trying to find, some of these have already been asked.
Can I just ask something related to that same page? Can you tell us more about the lift share scheme that seems to be being put into play?
Yeah, Alice. We've got someone from Transport, Alison, who's probably best placed to give an update on that one.
We have been looking at the lift share scheme for 3-ish years now. We're currently looking at it in regards to home to school transport as well, to try and reduce some of the costs there. The problem is that since lift share used to be very, very popular, but since COVID, it's dropped drastically. And when we were talking to our partners in the business parks, they said 3 years ago they absolutely would have joined us, they would have funded it, and they would have helped us. But now, because the amount of people has dropped going into the business parks, none of the business parks think it's feasible. So we're trying to work out if it's something we want to spend money on and if it will be worthwhile.
Thank you. Alex.
Thank you. On page 57, it talks about the Community Energy Fund for Wokingham. It said it was on hold due to staff issues. I don't know if this is a confidential question to ask, but I just wondered what that meant.
No, and this is something we've picked up internally. So this was something that internally it was being led previously from the energy team at Wokingham, but we've we recognise they don't have the capacity, so it's something we're going to take on to progress for next year. So the climate emergency team will hopefully progress that. So hopefully next year that won't be read, and we'll have more progress on that.
Okay. And then page 82 talks about the risk register. This is more of a broad question, but is there anything in particular that's slowing down the completion of the that's slowing down the creation of the risk register? Is there anything that's because that's listed as amber, is there anything in particular that's preventing that from being green?
So we're looking at that from an internal perspective. It's been looked at, it hasn't been picked up, and that's just from a prioritisation point of view. We are also looking at potentially doing a wider cross-Berkshire adaptation plan. So that's we're looking at within the University of Reading strategic partnership, whether we can, and also potentially through the Prosperity Board, there's opportunity to work together, because it feels like it makes sense for the adaptation to work with other authorities and not just do it on our own. So there's kind of two reasons for that not progressing, partly because we're waiting for the Prosperity Board net zero workstream to kind of evolve, because it's very early days, and also with the University of Reading it's kind of early days for both of them.
Okay, and then page 87 is about engagement with residents with regard to the new waste and recycling policy. It's listed as green because leaflets were delivered, response times were improved on social media, etc., etc. What I would say is, and I think all the councillors in this room can probably agree with me, is because we had all up elections, it was like by far the most contentious issue at the doorstep throughout the entire election. I almost couldn't get away from talking about bins for the entire 6 months I was campaigning. So, and there was, whilst this has been done, and I think you can kind of, as a box ticking exercise, go, well, it's green because we've done this. I sort of think that there was so little understanding from residents when I spoke to them about what the policy actually was and what the results of it were. And like, for example, I didn't even consider the positive environmental impacts of the policy. We put out a newsletter because we were getting told off about it on the doorstep. And so we put out a newsletter saying, well, the reason the Labour group supported this policy is because it saves X amount for the council budget, which enables us to spend more money on children's services and adult social care. That was the argument we put forward, and we got all three of us elected, I suppose, so it worked. But I think it was such a contentious issue, and it seemed that a lot of residents were not, well, even me, even as a councillor, I was not aware of the environmental impact of it. So I guess I sort of, were there any questionnaires done, or how did you evaluate the communication that you did with local residents? Because I think from my perspective, I would have that as amber, because I think whilst it was done, the communication was received, I don't think it was heard by people.
Yeah, so again, we haven't got someone from Waste on the call, so we can't, I don't know, the information on that evaluation process. Again, we can take it away and provide some information on that evaluation. I know they recruited some engagement officers to help in the promotions. They have I know there was a big kind of focus on the engagement side of stuff, but yeah, I can check on the evaluation side of things and what happened, what they did, and around that.
Okay, yeah, so there was all the consultation stuff first, and again, similar to the actual figures, we will monitor. There is stuff in place to monitor the progress of it. So in 6 months or however long it is, there should be figures coming back from that, and how well the engagement stuff has gone as well. That's included.
Thank you. Sorry if I'm taking up a lot of time here. The page 90 talks about engagement with schools and recycling. I remember my own experience of this at primary school was it was drilled into me at a very early age that climate change is a huge issue and that we need to do something about it. And I would say that's largely true for all people that are Gen Z. I think Gen Z are all acutely aware of the issues of climate change, and I think that is largely because of a very successful educational campaign to raise awareness of it. I wondered whether or not that is still the case for Gen Alpha, as they're known, and how much attention is being given to primary schools rather than secondary schools, because I think you will have more of an effect at a primary school level than at a secondary school level. By the time you get to secondary school, people's habits are fairly entrenched and people sort of lose interest in it. I think if you can get kids kind of invested in the issue early on, you're likely to see quite a big impact in behaviour.
from the schools I'm aware of that the waste team have gone into, it is primary schools. I think it's generally easier to get into primary schools than secondary schools, so that works well then with that kind of thinking.
Okay, and
Can we just let someone else have a go? I'll probably come back to you later. Catherine.
Well, Chair, I think I had my hand up earlier.
Okay.
Mine was down and up again, but go ahead, Peter.
Thank you. I did wonder if we were actually going to go through section by section on the CF, or we can just sort of dive into it if you've got questions. Is that okay that we dive around, or Chair, are you going to go through it section by section?
I'm happy to dive around actually.
Okay. So I've got a couple of things to discuss. So first of all, really bring up on the point that Adrian made earlier. You can see from page 22 that the vast majority, 48% of our emissions is domestic. So presumably heating, majority of heating, gas heating. And the aspiration on page 28 is to get 75% of homes to be EPC, C rated or above. But the update later on shows, I think, 140 residents have inquired about improving their insulation, and no figures about any activity to actually improve insulation. So I think there's a vast cavern of a gap between the aspiration of 75% of homes, the EPC C rating or above, and the actions and progress that we're making. So virtually no progress, and this is the big area where we need to make progress. So is this the bit that we're waiting for central government to help us out with, or because that's not stated, or do we just need to do a lot better in terms of getting housing, local area housing, insulated better? Because unless we insulate them to C or above, we're not going to get them off gas into heat pump territory.
Sorry, I'm just trying to find it in the plan. What was the page the action was?
So page 28 is the aspiration. So we want 75% of homes, and it would be good to actually have a number of houses that is, because 75%, not entirely sure what that means.
Page 66.
Page 66. Thank you very much. Page 66, and it says. Yeah, so there was a bit to say that there was an insulation scheme, and we'd had 140 households register, and I just think that insulation, the bit where we're trying to hit 75% of homes, seems to be the biggest benefit, but the one that we've made least progress on.
So just before you say it, Mary, as well, I'm sure you'll have more, but there is obviously a number of actions under 3.4 of the EPCC, as you say. That's EPCC is kind of this more of the standard, and a lot of the actions and a lot of the government support at the moment is available for those below those ratings, obviously for like the worse off homes and the more vulnerable, like fuel poverty and that kind of thing. So a number of the actions that you'll see, 3.4.1 has the EcoFlex scheme, which has had 1,600 homes in it. So the 140 for the HDAS scheme is just one specific part of that. We've got LAD 2 and 3. There's lots of schemes and the kind of ongoing. The energy team again have the more specific information, but there are kind of constant schemes available around that. They're more around the vulnerable side, and yes, it is something that in total we would obviously benefit greatly from more government support to help more family and more homes do that.
But how do we improve things? You talk about 1,600 homes. I don't know if that, is that 50% of our homes now upgraded, or is that 1%? I don't know, because you're using percentages and numbers. So
yeah,
what is 75% of our housing stock? What's the absolute number, and how are we doing against that? And if we're not doing very well, which I don't think we are, what's the plan to do better? That's the bit we need to do.
Yeah, I think it's something we can take away and have a look at those numbers, because we don't have them on hand today. But actually, yeah, if we have a clear, this is the percentage, this is the number, and that will, yeah, hopefully provide that clarity. I think something I mentioned earlier about looking at the EPC data and getting a picture, so understanding actually how many houses do we have across the borough at the different EPC ratings. I think once we've got that, we can put a more concrete plan in place to then think, so then how are we going to kind of change that and move towards getting them EPC C and above.
Very good. My other question is about solar farm. So renewable energy generation. So we've got Barkham, and that's going well. That's excellent. You've got site 2. Current state, the potential site has been identified. Can you share where that site is? The timescale cost says about 25 million. The medium-term financial plan for site 2 only has 18 million in the budget. Are our friends in finance happy to make up the rest of the money? Site 3, which is great because previously we only had 2 sites. Again, this potential site's been identified. Could you share the details of where that is? And there was no budget in the medium-term financial plan for a 3rd site, and it's only 3 million, which is relatively small. But have we got permission from the finance team to get capital spending on these projects?
So again, unfortunately, the energy team, who are best placed to answer the questions on the solar farms, weren't able to make it tonight. So it's something that we can take away and get back to you.
That would be great if you could do that. And Chair, at the risk of hogging the meeting, I will hand off to the next person. Thank you.
Okay, Catherine.
Thanks. And I guess firstly, thanks to the officers team, because I think, there's clearly a huge amount of work on it and great progress to be made. I think maybe just returning to some of the themes that first Peter and then Adrian were drawing up and thinking how we can move this forward. At this point in time, if we look into 2030, it's clear we've got a big gap. We all know that there's a spectrum of items which will deliver different levels of impact from a carbon and other perspective, and also a kind of axis of how much control or how within the council's control it would be. And so is this a good opportunity, sort of within, I guess, what time frame? How can we reframe this to maybe make it easier both to help the council to make clear to those stakeholders, whether that's central government, whether it's the private sector, homeowner, residents, what are the actions that essentially we need them to deliver upon in order to make there, and is there a better way in the future and not now that we could have to actually kind of draw out, okay, perhaps to get to that true 2030 net zero, because the current action plan doesn't get there. So can we map out that more ambitious trajectory whilst also being clear about, well, this is within the scope of our control, influence, and how do we map to who the partners and stakeholders are that can help us deliver where we've currently got gaps? Because just one example of a partnership, say a parish council. So I'm on the Charleville Parish Council at the moment. I think we'd struggled to pick up this action plan and kind of go, okay, right, we know our role, and maybe that's a bad example because it's very similar or it overlaps with the Borough Council, but yeah, these are where we can have the biggest impact, and this is how we're going to contribute, and actually feed that back to Wokingham Borough to allow us to incorporate all these actions that we need other people to take in tracking the progress towards a net zero. So I guess maybe there's a big picture question there of when and how, if is this updated to say, well, what's actually needed to get to net zero 2030, while also being clear about what can be delivered and what can't by who. Sorry if that was not a very clear question, but I guess maybe to phrase it into a particular question is, how do we get to a position where we can we can articulate that and be clear about how we can actually reach net zero.
I think one thing we are working on, just you referenced the parishes there, and it's something we're really keen to find those groups and organisations, and whether that's the parish or town councils or other groups. We recognise there's similar groups that have similar ambitions and want to achieve what's outlined in the CEAP and go above and beyond that. So we kind of recognise that we want to build those partnerships. We're working at the moment with Woodley Town Council as a bit of a pilot to see, let's try and work a bit closer with our town and parishes, and then once we've kind of hopefully have delivered some good stuff, we can then roll it out and work with other town and parishes. So that's one example, I guess, from the partnership perspective, is kind of finding those connections, and once we've found a group, either piloting and then scaling it, or whether it's it depends on what the group is.
Brianne, I don't know if you wanted to come in, but and maybe this is one to park for future place, but I think it is a question we need to revisit. How and when do we get from where we are today to a kind of, I guess, true net zero 2030, or an articulation of what we actually think is achievable and when?
Yeah, and I think you're right. I think it's the scale of what we're being asked is, and compared to, I suppose, what we do is it is huge compared to what we also have to deliver with adult social care and everything else that we have to do. And you're right. I think it's what leverage we have with our partners in terms of supporting us. We talked quite a bit about the university, but there's something there as well about working with our colleagues in the other Berkshire local authorities, whether it's giving us a louder voice to be able to lobby government for some of those asks that we've been talking about, but also to help us if we work collaboratively to come up with some of the solutions. It might be that if you've got 6 different local authorities all trying to do behaviour change, that if we share some of that we might be able to do perhaps a little bit more than we might be able to do on our own. But I agree that there is probably a piece of work, and I think that this scrutiny group could help us certainly do that, is to plot out that journey possibly that would take us to net zero and what that might look like going forward.
Thank you. And maybe just one specific section that I had a question on. Sorry, returning as well to waste, but from a target perspective. So from my reading, the only quantified targets seem to be in terms of increasing that percentage of recycled waste. It would be great to see some sort of quantified metrics around actually reduction or overall waste, because if we keep producing more and more waste, even if more of it is recycled, our footprint isn't necessarily going down, and it would be good to be able to track that, and therefore bring actions under that to reduce overall waste as well as increasing recycling. Thanks.
Yeah, just for that, I think the upcoming contract that was mentioned earlier, so if that has obviously a priority, and I believe that will have those kind of monitoring parts in it. We have mentioned in this CEAP, just as a brief introduction to that kind of area, the amount that we've reduced from previous years. So we're starting to introduce those.
Thank you.
Okay, Alex, have you got some more questions? Or has anyone else got any questions before? Oh, sorry, Moses.
Yeah, on page 32, going back to this carbon savings, it says the Healthy School Street program was listed as one of the key achievements. I happen to know because one of the schools that was selected is in Rastock Lane. That's in my ward. So I know that scheme has been withdrawn. So is that going to have a material effect on this estimate of the carbon savings?
That's the Healthy School Street programme.
Yeah, page 32, because it's been withdrawn.
Yeah, I've just
Sorry, it's been withdrawn for Radstock because we did a feasibility study and decided it wasn't feasible for that school, but there are going to be schools in the borough where it will be feasible, and we're currently looking at all schools to work out where will be good to implement it.
But will Radstock have a material impact on the estimated savings?
I don't know what the savings were. I think we weren't ever going to implement it across all schools because it's not feasible. So currently we're trying to work out where we can implement it and how much it will save in the future. Radstock was one of the initial schools, but it's still all in planning stages.
Just one more question for handover. How does knowing the number of EV vehicles registered translate to knowing the carbon savings due to reduction in IC mileage?
So Sophia, who does our EV, can't actually be here tonight, but I can take that away and come back to you on that.
Will it help if we send more questions after this meeting? And you can give us answers, because the experts don't seem to be here tonight.
Yes, I think you can do that. Brian, Neil?
Yeah?
Yes, send them to Neil.
Okay, thank you.
Can I ask a question on this while we're on that page, page 32, just about the cargo bikes? Is anyone else using them other than Shinfield Parish Council?
No, we've had really, really low take up. So what we're currently doing is we're looking at opening it up to members of the community and community groups. So one of the problems that we have faced that we didn't realise before we got them, because cargo bikes are quite new, is all cargo bikes are designed for people who are 5'4" and taller. And nearly everyone who's applied and who's wanted to use them are women. And a lot of them are 5'3" or 5'2", and they literally can't see over the top of the bikes. And this is something that a lot of councils have discovered in the last year or so, that cargo bikes were not designed for women.
I am 5'3" and have a cargo bike, Alison, so I'm happy to pick up with you.
Yeah, it's
not
the
the
big
box
ones
bike
that we've got.
It's a long tail cargo bike, but a really interesting finding on who's been applying.
Yeah, mostly women, and it's mostly small business owners who have looked at it. So it's been gardeners, a lot of bakers have wanted to use it, but again, the height and the strength required has been the biggest downfall with the bikes that we currently have. But we're hoping that if we open it up to community groups, we'll get a lot more uptake on it.
Okay, thank you. Moses. Alex. Is there one? Sorry, Lou.
Sorry, I'm going to do an Alex here because I don't know what I don't know. But I had a question about the sort of trying to encourage people to change to electric vehicles. And again, I could be completely wrong, but my understanding was that the greenest vehicle you can drive is the one that you already own. So how does that square with encouraging people to get electric vehicles? Are we just talking about people that are planning on changing anyway? Or?
So I think, unless Alison's got extra on this is obviously once people get rid of their vehicle eventually. We're not asking people to just scrap their vehicle immediately. It's the gradual transition once it reaches the end of its life. That's obviously, we're aiming for the 2030 goal. And so with this, that people will gradually phase out their own vehicles by then. So obviously it's not 100%, and there are kind of measures that encourage transition, but yeah, it's not just scrap it right now.
Okay, super. Thank you.
Peter. Sorry, I can't see the screen that well.
That's okay. That's fine.
Peter.
Thank you. A couple of questions. So first, in terms of housing development to new houses, so clearly new houses are being built, and we've got a local plan update imminently going to give us a lot more houses to be built. Are the figures for 2030 in terms of emissions do they take into account the expected new builds between now and 2030?
Sorry, I'm sure you're going to mention, James, but obviously in terms of the plan, it's primarily neutral from that perspective, but obviously there's a lot more detail in the LPU.
Yeah, so so the action plan talks about all the new developments being a kind of neutral impact, because obviously unless the new housing that we're delivering is kind of carbon positive, then it will only ever have an impact if we're not achieving net zero homes. So the starting position is that we'd like to achieve all new homes to be net zero, or as close to net zero as possible. Current kind of government guidance and policy doesn't actually allow us to achieve that. So I think going back to one of the questions earlier, one of the things we'd very much like to see in updated policy from government is around supporting authorities like ourselves who want to introduce really kind of ambitious climate targets in terms of energy efficiency of new homes. But the assumption made in the action plan is effectively that if we can achieve net zero through new development, then that would have a kind of neutral impact. It wouldn't have any saving per se, because you're obviously adding new development, new population into the borough.
So it's a lot of heavy lifting with that if an assumption, but I don't think it's realistic to suggest that all the houses built between now and 2030 are going to be carbon neutral. So we should really be taking into account the additional emissions due to those new buildings and more people and more vehicles. So it sounds like we've got a bit of a gap in terms of what we're trying to achieve versus what the actual target is.
Yeah, so that's where I guess the annual updating and reporting comes in. So the kind of figures in terms of what our borough emissions are will factor in new dwellings and new buildings that have been achieved. So obviously, new homes that are approved now aren't against planning policy or building reg requirements that necessitate that they have to be net zero. So yes, there will be an element of between now and 2030. The local plan is obviously looking to 2040 and so slightly beyond that. So that's where the kind of the annual refresh and the reporting of the updated figures will come in, and that again, that's the kind of lack of strong building regs or national policy guidance on that is something that's going to have to be kind of factored in and tempers what we can achieve as a borough.
The problem with that is you're just doing that on an annual basis, updating the figures based on history, but you've got predictions here. Those predictions should take into account the reality of what we think is going to be delivered, not an aspiration of zero for every building between now and 2030. So I think your figures are going to. Mari, you reported the benefit of a reduction in our target. I think sounds like as we build more houses, those figures are going to go up. So we're going to lose those savings. I'm concerned about that. The other question I have, an issue I have, is on the procurement section. So section 7 talks about engaging suppliers to improve their sustainability measures, etc. So my big concern here is that bigger companies, those large corporations who have the capacity to have dedicated departments for these sorts of systems and processes will gain an unfair advantage over smaller suppliers. The smaller suppliers won't have the capacity to do all these sorts of things and therefore won't be considered for council contracts. How do we ensure that there's level playing field for smaller suppliers coming into the council and they're not excluded because they don't have the size or capacity to do some of these things?
I think that's something definitely that the procurement team are considering and are thinking about. Again, unfortunately, procurement aren't on the call today, but to get kind of a detailed answer on that, we can go back to them and get an answer for you. Andrew, I don't know if there's anything that you wanted to add from the procurement side, because Andrew works quite closely with our procurement colleagues.
Yeah, only to reiterate what you're saying, that obviously that this was raised at the over in Scrutiny where we looked at this, and we have made changes in discussion since. So it was raised as an issue that, yes, we want to make sure small suppliers aren't excluded. So they are looking at establishing ways to make sure that's the case. But in the meantime, they're looking at things like supporting the suppliers in kind of providing advice on how to answer the questionnaires, what kind of things they're looking for, like, so we can help them make sure that they are able to answer the questions in the same way that the larger businesses are doing, at least.
Yeah. Thank you.
Adrian.
Thank you. Mary, I had a question from your presentation earlier on. You said that our net shortfall had shrunk from 232 to 167.
Yeah.
What contributed to that change?
Yeah, I'll ask Andrew to just talk about that. He is the data man in the team, so.
Yeah, so we use the scatter tool to help with this significantly. So a bunch of the savings this year were from increasing the obviously the variety of changes across the exits themselves. So some of it's come from our actions, and a good part has also come from the business as usual savings as they're described in the plan. So they've come from transport and some from energy. For example, as the energy sector nationally, as the grid decarbonises, we get some savings from that, like in terms of the overall trajectory. So largely from those three areas, I'd say.
Would it be worth including that in the report? It's quite a significant change, isn't it?
I mean, we could. We try not to go into too much detail for some people who won't have that line. I think the methodology parts will be available at request. So if there is like people wanting that granular level of detail, that can be requested.
Yeah, I'm sure we can make sure that we reflect that in the report. So, and we do have a methodology paper as well, and I'm sure that's been circulated as part of the papers today. So if you wanted any more explanation on that, we can provide that as well.
It's not technical. Okay, I'm looking at new development versus retrofit. And it says here, you plan to implement passive housing scheme for existing domestic and commercial buildings. Is there any plan to do the same for new developments?
I think.
Yeah, so I can come in on that one. So effectively, yes. So the policy approach that we'd like to implement in the emerging local plan is effectively striving towards a kind of passive house or a kind of equivalent standard. The difficulty we have there at the moment is that that's not an approach that's actually supported by national policy. So various other local authorities have managed to introduce those standards and been able to evidence that that's the best way forward, and that is kind of industry best practice in terms of what we should be doing around kind of energy metric policies, which kind of set space heating demand targets on dwellings. So the previous government kind of last December actually introduced a written ministerial statement which basically specified that local authorities can't introduce their own standards unless, their own standards that go beyond kind of current or planned building regulations, unless they're kind of specified in a particular way, which is kind of the building regs has a look at a target emission rate for a nominal house. So there's specific kind of policy restrictions at the national level at the moment that exist around what we can do. We're hoping that we're producing a piece of evidence at the moment which we think is going to help us in kind of at the examination in public when we get there with a local plan, that will allow us to defend the policy approach that we're seeking to introduce, so that kind of passive standard. But it's a big uncertainty in effect, really, because when you talk about national policy, it talks about sustainability in terms of those three pillars of kind of environmental, social and economic. So obviously there's a kind of housing crisis at the moment. So one of the previous government's view on this was that they didn't want local authorities introducing these differing kind of ambitious standards if that was going to stymie housing development. So I think kind of initial conversations have already happened with kind of local MPs around what the new government might do to assist us in that regard. But the short answer I think is that that's what we're striving towards with new development. But that ultimately is going to be in the hands of an independent planning inspector, and we expect kind of the development industry to rally against kind of very, very extreme targets which are beyond what they're used to delivering.
On page 29, it says all new residential and non-residential shall be designed to be built to EV ready. The emphasis seems to always be on EV. What about this source of charging the vehicles? If we continue to use fossil fuel, how are we really reducing CO2 emissions?
Yeah, I can comment briefly on that one. So we haven't got any, unless Alison wants to comment on. I'm not sure that's kind of your area, but that's kind of one of the areas that the local plan will look at. EV ready obviously helps with emissions of. If people are going to still drive their cars, then we want those to be kind of electric vehicles and low emission vehicles. And EV is one of the ways to do that. So we can make sure that housing is equipped to accommodate that. But then alongside that, the spatial strategy in the plan, our design policies are going to be kind of geared towards new developments, kind of linking into where existing services and facilities are. Being infrastructure rich in and of themselves with kind of new schools and local centres to make it as easy as possible for people not to have to get in their vehicle in the first place. So it's kind of, while we're championing kind of EV ready homes, that's kind of just one piece of the jigsaw in effect of what we'd be seeking to achieve more holistically.
And if you do have any further EV questions, Sophia will be more than happy to answer them if you wanted to send them through to us.
Thank you.
Okay, Lou. So can I go back to the cargo bikes and the question about them not being very useful or rideable for women of a certain height? But just because Caption seemed to suggest that there are brands or models that can be ridden by shorter women, and if we've got women wanting to use them who can't, can we not just get the ones that can be used?
So we received funding to buy the cargo bikes for business use. So we bought business use cargo bikes. So they're very industrial, they're big solid steel things with massive great containers, 660 litre containers on them. It's something that we've spoken to other councils about, and we didn't realise, and it wasn't really known until recently, that the height was going to be an issue. If we can get funding for more bikes, so I've been speaking to Essex and to West Berks, who both expanded from doing just business, like we currently are, into the community groups, and they have bought different types of bikes, and I've been taking advice on what types of bikes they have, what ones worked, what hasn't, and what kind of usage they'll be used for. Will it be going to the shops? Will it be doing a school run? What will they be used for, and which will be the best bike, if we can get funding, for those people?
I have got a question. I can slip it in now. On page 78, develop a natural flood management partnership and scheme. Are we working with Swallowfield Flood Resilience Group? And as a sort of side to that, I think there is some development of wetland possibly in Swallowfield. Van Diemen's Land is the name that springs to mind.
We'll have to take that one away, because that's that's the biodiversity team that kind of lead on that action.
Thank you. So we got any more questions? Oh, Alex.
So I've only got 3 more. The first one, I should have actually started with this. The graph, which shows the green, orange, and whatever the other colour is, going down. The orange one is us or our plan. The years is cut off, so you can't see when ours hits the origin, which is quite an important thing, because obviously you can look at it in terms of how far away we are in terms of carbon reduction, but actually I think the thing that matters is how many years behind are we from being net zero. So do we know when that line touches the origin? Do we know when it actually hits zero according to our current estimates?
It's an interesting one here. We hadn't done it that way. Yeah, there's obviously lots of different ways of presenting the data. We could have a look at that kind of metric. Yeah.
Because I sort of crudely drew a line myself, and it looks like it's sort of about 5 years. But anyway, like I say,
Yeah, we have to do it. Yeah.
The second question is page 107, the questionnaire that businesses have to fill out, and it mentions as well in there that this will be used for new contracts. We've got quite a big contract that is being presented at full council related to recycling and waste collection. It says the questionnaire is optional. So my question is it possible to secure a bid from Wokingham Borough Council without filling out the questionnaire? Because if so, then I don't really see the point of it.
So I think, again, we did discuss this at the previous meeting. If you, and obviously you're new. No, it's okay. I know you're new. So yeah, it is optional, and that's because it's only an initial stage, because we are still gathering information on all of that. And I think it was mentioned earlier that we will progress that, and the aim is to make that compulsory. But for the waste one you're mentioning, we are working closely with the team to ensure, obviously because it's so linked to climate emergency, that we are including as much as we can there.
Right, and then my final one, which is sort of a fun one. Has anybody looked into electric scooters? Because I work in Oxford, and they've just renewed their electric scooter contract with Voi. I know that loads of people, whilst I was campaigning, canvassing to get myself elected, lots of people mentioned that young people are already on electric scooters, annoying people on the high street. So they're already illegally in use. I don't know if anybody's thought about potentially extending them for legal use. They are quite useful means of moving about without internal combustion.
So I can come in on this one. Electric scooters are currently illegal in the United Kingdom. There are, I think it's 12 trial areas, Oxford being one of them. And there is a lot of analysis going on about the accidents, about what needs to be done to see if it's feasible to make them legal. It was due to be reported on last year on whether the government would change their mind. It got extended. The near miss rate and the accident rate is extremely high. So they are trying to work out if they make them legal, and if they do, how can they make them safe? How can they make sure they're insured? How can they make sure that they are not going to increase the amount of accidents on our roads?
Okay, well, that makes sense. Cool. Thank you very much.
Chair, if I have
Peter?
one final question. So, waste and recycling. So, waste and recycling target is to achieve 70% recycling rate. On page 126, it shows the waste and recycling figures from Chute End Office is around 33% recycled, which is woeful. We as the council should be setting an example, setting the standards across the borough. So what are we going to do in terms of improving the recycling rate from Chute End?
Agree. I think that's, we do have to lead the way. I think it's something that we can pick up and look at as an internal group. It's something potentially we can bring up in the Net Zero Heroes group. So that's a group we have internally for officers across the council that have an interest in climate change and sustainability. So it feels like that might be a good forum to start with, to think, actually, we're not doing as well as we could. What can we do? And the good thing about having the officers from the different areas is that we represent, you know, different teams across the council. So I think it's a good point. It's something we can take away.
Thank you.
Okay, got any more questions? Do we feel we've got any sort of resolutions we want to make from this? Any recommendations? Do you want
to? In previous years, the committee's comments and questions have been formulated into a document, which has then been submitted as part of the eventual report that goes to council. So that could be one step that we do. And obviously all the questions which couldn't be answered tonight, we will get those in there as well and make it into a comprehensive document with the committee's views, if members are happy with that.
Adrian?
So, yeah, very happy with it. What's the process by which that happens? Do we do the minutes first and then write a report from the minutes, or does someone have to write a report? How does that happen? So
I'll do the minutes, and then if members are happy with the minutes plus all the additional stuff, we'll just turn it into a report. We've done that in the past, so I'm practiced at doing that.
Excellent.
When does this get presented to the council?
I think it's going to council in September. Can officers confirm that?
Yeah, it's going to full council on the 19th of September.
Thank you.
Okay, so we need to thank the officers. We need to resolve that. We thank the officers for attending and being so informative and answering most of our questions. And the second one is that we're going to produce this report of our questions and answers. Is there anything else?
If everyone's content with that as a way forwards, then I think we've finished on this item.
The work programme for 24-25, which is on page 187, right at the end.
So page 187, there's a table there, which is, I think, quite a generic table of potential items for the committee to consider. Obviously, tonight, a lot of additional areas have been scrutinised and probed. So my suggestion would be that I arrange a meeting with the chair and the executive member and officers and try and formulate all these items into a work programme for each of the committee's meetings over the next few months, and then bring it back to the next meeting as a way forwards.
Adrian. Well,
Jordan. I just wanted to check this proposed meeting will be coming out after your draft report is produced and shared with members.
I think we'll try and organise it as quickly as possible.
Just feel it might be helpful once this report is produced. It might help shape what items we want to discuss at the next meeting.
Okay, I will get it done as quickly as possible. Then obviously, because of it, August is coming up, that will be, so hopefully in the next 10 days or so.
Yeah, so it's just a request. When we're putting the programme of work together, could we focus on the areas and actions that would make the biggest difference in CO2 terms? Because there's lots of really interesting things in here, some of which have big other benefits. But I think our job is to focus on the CO2 reductions. And there are probably only half a dozen actions in the plan that achieve 80-90% of the benefit, and I think we should be giving those due attention in our work.
Could I suggest if members have any specific issues they think would fit that criteria, then please do contact myself and the chair, and we can feed that into the discussions.
Moses?
Is it possible to run through what you had in mind when you put this work program together so we can understand what input we need to make?
So it's the items on page 187 and the discussion this evening, I think, highlighted a number of points. So I'll reflect those in the minutes and get those circulated around as quickly as possible. And then members can add in comments at that point if they think I've missed anything of interest, if that works as a process.
So that would lead to the updating the work program items for the year. Okay. Thank you.
So there'll be a completely new work program, basically.
Well, it will be a draft for each of the meetings coming forwards, and then members can talk about that at the next meeting and change it or add to it as they think fit. So members need to lead this process.
Yeah, and it always comes up on the every committee meeting. We always review this. Okay, and then we always review the action tracker on the following page.
Catherine, sorry, just on the work plan. Yeah, I think that makes sense. I guess one of the things, and perhaps it's been useful to have the CF sort of update report today to get sort of up to speed quite quickly. But I think absolutely on Adrian's point, we need to focus, and that's maybe a steer that this committee is giving back, is that we do need to focus on the areas where we've got the biggest gaps and therefore the most work to do. But I wonder whether we've got that stream around the overall trajectory as well as individual items, just to draw that out. Perhaps I'm sure Neil's captured, but I think it's an area that, I mean, I think it's actually wonderful from the officers that there's been so many areas that we haven't had the perfect representative here, because it shows how many people that the climate emergency team are actually working with across the council. But it does mean that there's a potential to get pulled into a lot of directions. So from a process perspective, am I correct in understanding that this kind of draft revised work plan we can then sort of shape and discuss? Would that be at the next Climate Emergency Oversight and Scrutiny Committee meeting, or would that be in the intervening period, Neil?
Well, as soon as a draft is available, I will send it round. So it could be before the next meeting, and then we can have a formal discussion at the next meeting.
That'd be good. Right. To make progress on at least a couple of points. Thanks.
Yeah, that sounds good. Right, I think we've got to the end. Thank you for coming. Oh, Jordan's got something to say.
Just checking we've fully gone through the action tracker there. So I think it's a bit sidelined by Karen.
Sorry, we didn't go through the action tracker. Well spotted. So, oh yes, so I mentioned this to Neil before, that the climate emergency business engagement and green skills development, it said further update in 6 months, but actually it's going to be still a bit longer.
I think the elections got in the way of that.
Any other comments on that? Okay, right.